So picture this. You step away from your desk to grab a coffee, right? And your laptop just goes to sleep.
Yeah, the screen goes black.
Exactly. To you, it's just this glowing rectangle sitting there, burning a tiny trickle of electricity while it waits for you to come back.
Just wasting time, essentially.
Right. But what if that idle downtime, like those 5 minutes you spend staring out the window or that hour you take for lunch, what if that could literally be harnessed to plant a physical forest?
It sounds like science fiction, honestly.
It really does. But today, we're doing a deep dive into a stack of sources that explain how this is actually happening. We're looking at how passive digital behavior is being engineered to create real, verifiable environmental action.
And we've got some really fascinating material to go through for this.
Yeah, we're looking at detailed infographics, raw data reports, and a specific strategic partnership between two tech entities, IdleForest and Hoken Tech.
Which is such a weird but perfect collision of things.
Wow.
You have massive internet infrastructure, behavioral psychology, and this really radical corporate transparency all coming together.
Right, and before we really get into how IdleForest works, I feel like we have to set the stage. Because we live in this digital-first world, and there's a huge paradox there.
Oh, absolutely. The paradox is that our entirely digital ecosystem requires a staggering amount of physical energy to keep it running.
Right, it's not actually weightless.
No, not at all. But what's fascinating about our sources today is that we're moving away from those vague, corporate green claims. We're actually looking at raw, transparent data.
Even when that data looks, well, pretty terrible at first glance.
Exactly. Especially when it looks terrible.
We are definitely going to tear into that imperfect data later because the year-over-year reporting from Hoken Tech is just, it's wild. It's a crazy case study in vulnerability.
It really is.
But to understand the solution, we have to look at the baseline problem our sources outline, the invisible cost of the internet.
Yeah, because when you ask someone to picture the cloud, they just imagine...
Like literal clouds, data just floating in the ether.
Right, something weightless. But the cloud is heavy. It's completely terrestrial. It is made of concrete, steel, lithium, copper.
It's physical infrastructure.
Massive physical infrastructure. It relies on these sprawling data centers and server farms. And the core metric in our sources is just staggering.
Hit me with the numbers.
So data centers are responsible for approximately 1 to 2% of global electricity consumption.
Wait, 1 to 2% of global electricity?
Of the entire planet's usage, yes.
That is monstrous when you think about every manufacturing plant, every city grid, every train system. And up to 2% is just strictly for housing and routing data.
It's a massive footprint, and the traditional server farm model has these distinct inherent flaws beyond just the power draw.
Right, the infographics break this down pretty methodically.
Yeah, so first you have the high energy consumption, which obviously translates directly into a massive carbon footprint, depending on how the local grid is powered.
Usually fossil fuels.
Often, yes. But then you also have the land usage. I mean, these aren't just small office buildings.
No, they're hyperscale industrial complexes.
Exactly. They require vast amounts of real estate, usually in areas where water is heavily drawn for the cooling systems.
Because servers get incredibly hot.
Right. And furthermore, from a network architecture perspective, these massive centers represent centralized failure points.
Ooh, right. Like if a cooling system fails in one of these massive centralized farms or a regional grid goes down,
a massive chunk of the internet goes dark.
right, you have thousands of companies relying on a single geographic choke point.
So the sources present this alternative. It's called the distributed lightweight approach.
And they claim this is the fix.
Well, they claim it's ultra-low energy, has minimal carbon emissions, provides redundant systems, and totally optimizes resource allocation.
That's a lot of promises.
It is, but the boldest claim is the efficiency metric. The distributed approach is cited as being 80 to 90% greener than traditional server farms.
80 to 90% greener. That's not just a small optimization.
No, it's a complete reimagining of the technology. You're moving from a centralized factory model to a decentralized network.
Which means you aren't building a new factory.
Right. You're utilizing the latent capacity of devices that are already manufactured, already plugged in, and already connected.
Okay, so let me try an analogy here.
Yeah.
A traditional server farm is like a massive gas-guzzling power plant, right?
Sure.
It takes immense infrastructure to build, it runs hot, and it pushes power outward from one single spot.
Right, highly centralized.
But a distributed network is like having a million tiny solar panels on individual houses.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You coordinate the output of all those tiny nodes, and suddenly you have the capacity of a massive facility, but you didn't have to pour a single yard of concrete.
That analogy holds up perfectly. The compute power already exists. The global network of personal computers and enterprise machines, it's basically an ocean of processing capability that just sits dormant.
Because we aren't using 100% of our CPU all day long.
Exactly. The bottleneck has never been a lack of total global compute power. The bottleneck has been the software architecture required to actually route tasks to those dormant nodes safely.
Which brings us perfectly to IdleForest,
Yes. Enter IdleForest.
because the sources introduced this as the actual mechanism to harness that distributed ocean of power.
Right, so what is it? It's basically a browser extension and a desktop app.
And the fundamental premise is that it transforms your unused data, your idle resources, into what they call virtual growth.
Which then translates into real trees.
Okay, but let's drill down into that mechanism because it sounds like magic. How does unused bandwidth actually turn into revenue for trees?
Right, it's not magic, it's logistics. The text explains that when your device is sitting idle, the software channels that unused capacity into approved research and content delivery activities.
Content delivery activities, so like CDNs.
Exactly, content delivery networks.
So instead of a website paying a massive centralized server to host its video files or images, it pays a distributed network to hold and route pieces of that data.
Yes, so your idle computer is essentially acting as a microserver. It's helping route traffic or maybe running complex research computations that institutions actually pay for.
I see. So you're basically renting out the empty space in your computer's processing queue.
Right. And the revenue generated from those microtransactions is pooled by IdleForest to fund global reforestation.
That is brilliant.
And the creator of the platform, Daniel, he anchored this whole project on one very specific insight.
The behavioral simplicity thing.
Yes, the intersection of internet infrastructure, sustainability design, and behavioral simplicity.
I want to spend some time on this because the psychology of passive activism is so interesting. The text explicitly says this avoids asking users to become activists overnight.
Right, because traditional activism has so much friction.
Exactly. The friction is incredibly high. You're asking people to fundamentally alter their daily routines.
Change your diet, stop driving, buy expensive sustainable goods.
Right. And for someone who is already stressed, already stretched thin by just living their life, that friction is a massive barrier.
It requires sustained cognitive effort. What Daniel identified is that millions of devices sit connected daily with unused capacity.
And the people owning those devices probably want to help the environment.
Most people do. But the friction prevents it. So by engineering a system of passive environmental action, you completely eliminate the behavioral barrier.
You don't have to remember to donate a portion of your paycheck.
No.
You don't have to change your commute. You just have to leave your computer turned on, which you are probably going to do anyway.
Exactly. You remove the friction entirely.
But, and this is a big but, you introduce a totally different kind of barrier. Trust.
Oh, absolutely.
The documentation anticipates this heavily. Because if I hear, hey, install this third-party extension that's going to use your bandwidth and processor while you're not looking, every cybersecurity alarm in my head goes off.
As it should.
It sounds like letting a stranger borrow your car while you're asleep.
That skepticism is entirely warranted, especially today with cryptojacking and data harvesting everywhere.
So how do they get past that?
The sources organize their defense around what they call the 3 promises.
Okay, let's go through them.
Well, first, they emphasize there are 0 donations required, it's completely free, and no browser changes are needed, it just operates in the background.
So it's not injecting weird ads into my searches.
Right. Promise number 1 is 100% safe and secure. They use encrypted connections and have ironclad data protection.
Okay, and promise 2.
Promise 2 is no performance impact. They claim it's a lightweight operation that maintains your device's optimal speed.
And promise 3 is the automatic tree planting.
Right. But that second promise, no performance impact, is where the technical execution is everything.
Because if it's passive, it has to stay passive. If I move my mouse or I open a giant spreadsheet or a video editor, the background process has to instantly get out of the way.
Right. It has to yield priority immediately.
Because if my computer starts sounding like a jet engine while I'm just trying to check my email, I am uninstalling that extension so fast.
Everyone would. It has to be a ghost in the machine.
But a safe ghost. Which brings us to the trust factors the sources mention.
Right. 0 access to personal data and open source code.
The open source code is huge. I mean, for a tech-literate audience, that's the only way this works.
Why is that?
Because you aren't just taking the PR team's word for it. When a company says, we don't access personal data, open source means the community can actually go verify that claim.
The code base is public.
Exactly. Independent developers can audit it. They can verify the sandbox constraints. It shifts the whole thing from a corporate promise to auditable proof.
And that transparency is clearly working because they've hit some major milestones. The sources report they've already planted over 300 to 400 trees.
Wow, 3D 400, that's real impact.
Right, and they've completed the browser extension, the desktop app, and a referral system. Plus, a mobile app is coming soon, and they're in the middle of a corporate certification process.
But let's talk about those 3D 400 trees, because virtual growth is just data, right? Planting a tree requires a physical person with a shovel and dirt.
It does, and that's where their partners come in. IdleForest works with Trees for the Future and Tree Nation.
The sources specifically naming those organizations is crucial.
Because they're verified organizations.
Exactly. When a tech startup makes vague claims about planting trees but doesn't name their partners, they're usually just buying bulk carbon credits on the secondary market.
Which are notoriously sketchy.
Very sketchy. Sometimes the forests they're claiming to protect burned down 5 years ago. But by partnering with Tree Nation, they're locking themselves into actual boots-on-the-ground, auditable reality.
It bridges the gap between digital action and physical action perfectly.
Okay, so we've seen how this tool works for the individual. It's frictionless, it's passive, it's safe. But our sources make a really sharp pivot here.
Yeah, we shift from the individual user to a corporate entity, Hoken Tech.
Right, and this is where we get to see what happens when a digital-first company applies this same ethos of transparency to themselves.
And specifically, what happens when the data they publish is incredibly unflattering.
Yes. Let's talk about the partnership between Hoken Tech and IdleForest. The context here is that customers and investors, they want solid numbers now.
They're tired of greenwashing.
Exactly. A green leaf in your email signature doesn't cut it anymore. Sustainability is getting harder to fake.
And Hoken Tech is in a particularly interesting spot because they operate a digital-first environment with blockchain-based components.
Which is basically a lightning rod for environmental criticism.
Oh, heavily debated. The
Yeah.
energy required to validate blockchain transactions can be immense.
So Hoken Tech decides to publish their year-over-year sustainability data, 2024 versus 2025. And the numbers, I mean, it's a massive shock.
Let's run through the raw data from the sources. In 2024, their energy usage was 311 kilowatt hours.
Okay.
In 2025, it jumped to 970 kilowatt hours.
That is a 212% increase.
Yes, and the CO2 emissions followed suit. They went from 121 kilograms up to 376 kilograms.
Another 211% jump.
Right. The trees needed to offset it went from 9 to 28. And the energy costs went from 44 euros to 136 euros.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, most companies would bury a 212% increase in their carbon footprint.
Oh, absolutely. They would hide it, manipulate the metrics, or just delay the report.
It's like stepping on a scale after eating nothing but cake for a month and then renting a billboard to show everyone the number. Why on earth would they publish this?
The source material actually has a phrase for this. They call it growth measured, not hidden.
Growth measured, not hidden.
Right. It's defined as mature sustainability work. They are using raw numbers to guide decisions rather than sweeping them under the rug.
I mean, it makes sense if you think about it. If you're a scaling tech company and your user base grows, your server load grows, your energy consumption has to increase.
It's the physics of a digital business.
Right. Pretending you have a perfectly flat emissions curve while you're growing at 300% is just lying.
Yeah.
So by publishing this terrifying 212% increase, they're actually building incredible credibility.
They're completely disarming their critics. You can't accuse Hoken Tech of greenwashing when they are literally handing you the data that shows their footprint tripling.
It's a crazy competitive advantage when you frame it like that.
It is, but they still have a problem. Raw data like 376 kilograms of CO2 is really hard to communicate.
Yeah, making the invisible visible. Because 376 kilograms of invisible gas means literally nothing to my brain.
Right. Humans aren't wired to understand that.
So how does Hoken Tech translate this so it isn't just a meaningless number on a PDF?
In their 2025 snapshot, they translate that 376 kilograms into highly relatable metrics.
Okay, like what?
They say it is equal to a standard light bulb left on continuously for 2,020 days.
2,020 days. That's over 5.5 years of a light bulb burning nonstop.
It's visceral, right?
Very. I can picture that. I can see a lamp on in a room for 5 years.
They also equate it to driving a car for 2,688 kilometers.
Wow. If you think about your daily commute, you know how much gas that takes. You know how many hours on the highway that is.
Exactly. It forces stakeholders to actually confront the reality of their digital usage. It changes the relationship consumers have with the brand.
So what's the end goal for them, the mitigation side?
Based on that 969.89 kilowatt hours of total energy, they calculated they need exactly 28.1 trees to reach a 70% offset goal.
28.1 trees.
Yes.
And suddenly we see the synergy. Because you have Hoken Tech needing 28 trees, and they are partnering with IdleForest, who has automatically planted over 3,400 trees.
It's a perfect match.
It makes Hoken Tech's terrifying footprint seem incredibly manageable, because they paired it with the exact right tool.
The sources say something really profound here. The strongest partnerships are ones where the stories already fit before the announcement is written.
Oh, I like that. It's not just PR fluff.
No, it's an integrated ecosystem.
Yeah.
Hoken Tech tracks and measures the damage with radical transparency, and IdleForest provides a frictionless, verifiable way to repair it.
It's like Hoken Tech is writing this hyper-detailed budget of all their debt, and IdleForest is the automated savings account systematically paying it off.
That's exactly what it is. And for startups today, the text emphasizes that sustainability isn't just about image anymore, it's about resilience.
Let's unpack that. How does publishing a 212% carbon increase make you more resilient?
Because if you track every single kilowatt hour, you know exactly where your inefficiencies are. You are audit-proof.
Oh, right. When the environmental regulations inevitably change and get stricter, Hoken Tech doesn't have to scramble. They already know their exact numbers down to the decimal.
Exactly. They've proven that rapid innovation and heavy responsibility can move together.
So just to recap the journey we've been on today, we started by looking at this massive problem: data centers draining 1 to 2% of global electricity.
A huge terrestrial footprint.
Right. Then we looked at Daniel's brilliant psychological insight, with IdleForest harnessing idle bandwidth to plant trees without asking people to change their behavior.
Removing the friction from activism.
And finally, we saw Hoken Tech bravely publishing a 212% spike in emissions, proving that real sustainability demands both radical transparency and frictionless tools.
It's a complete paradigm shift, and honestly, it leaves me with one final thought from the text.
What's that?
If a single open-source browser extension can take our wasted, idle computer time and turn it into a physical, living forest, what does that say about how we define waste in the digital age?
Wow. Yeah, are our devices really a liability to the planet?
Right. Or if we manage them with ultimate transparency and distributed networks, could those exact same devices become the very tools that save it?
That is something to think about the next time your screen goes black. Think about the hidden power sitting right there on your desk. Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources today. We hope you look at your screen time and your idle time in a whole new light.